Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into some of the most bizarre, literally reality-bending scenarios the human mind can possibly conjure up. We're going to look way past the standard medical definitions and take a journey down the rabbit hole to examine the profound, terrifying, and honestly, sometimes strangely beautiful philosophy of psychosis. I mean, have you ever stopped to wonder what actually happens when the very fabric of reality just stops making sense?
Okay, let's dive right into this. You know those wild theories you see online all the time? People claiming that the Earth is undeniably flat, that the moon is a hologram, or, get this, that birds are actually ruled by AI chips meant to control the world? It sounds absolutely absurd to us, right? But here's the thing. To the people experiencing these thoughts, this isn't a joke. It's an absolute, undeniable truth. And that completely sets up our journey today into the mind's most fascinating and terrifying corners. We're going to a place where reality isn't just questioned, it's entirely rewritten.
So let's start with section 1. What is psychosis really?
Okay, picture this wild scenario. Three friends take a trip to Dahab. They consume a massive 50 grams of hydro over their stay, and their reality just completely fractures. One of them actually thinks he can walk on water. Another is convinced his family invented the internet, so he turns off his phone to avoid being tracked. And the third, he genuinely believes he has literally become the Islamic calendar month of Dhul Qaeda. To grasp what happened to them, we have to point out an absolutely crucial foundation here. There's a huge difference between what we usually call an emotional struggle, like anxiety, daily stress, or the depression, and a full-blown psychotic break. In an emotional struggle, you're still perceiving the exact same world as everyone else. It's just your feelings about it that are affected. But in psychosis, your brain starts sending these false, undeniable signals to your senses. You totally lose connection to our shared reality. You might hear voices that aren't there or harbor deeply rooted delusions that just completely defy all logic. Now, if you go to a psychiatrist, they're going to give you the clinical view. They'll explain that psychosis is essentially an imbalance of dopamine in the brain, and the treatment, medication to adjust those hormone levels and silence the hallucinations. And hey, those pills absolutely work to stop the delusions, but they leave a massive gap. As the Dutch philosopher Wouter Kusters points out, just reducing madness to brain chemistry is kind of like cutting someone open to find the physical location of love. Science can stop the symptoms, sure, but it completely fails to explain the profound meaning, the absolute terror, and the strange internal logic behind the madness itself.
Moving on to section 2, a reality more than truth.
To really understand this, we need to look at the concept of hyper-reality. Because to the person experiencing psychosis, their bizarre world doesn't feel like a dream, and it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels intensely, overwhelmingly, and undeniably real. Actually, often it feels more real than the mundane world you and I live in every day. And Wouter Kusters uses this brilliant metaphor of the Lorenz machine to illustrate this. Imagine a mythical device that perfectly reflects and inverts everything you put into it. You put in a right shoe, a left shoe comes out. But what if you put your entire consciousness into it? You step out, and the world looks exactly the same. The streets, the cars, the people. But fundamentally, your internal perception of it has flipped 360 degrees. You're in the exact same physical space, but you're operating on a completely inverted, yet internally perfect logic.
Listen to this incredibly powerful quote by Laura Jefferson, who actually wrote about her own experiences in a mental institution. She said, "Every world of madness is completely private, yet it seems to the madman more real than reality itself." Just think about that for a second. There are patients in hospitals who literally cannot sleep because they are so overwhelmed by the absolute euphoria of believing they're the president of the country or that they have literal supernatural powers. You can't just argue them out of it, because to their senses, the delusion is the ultimate truth.
Which brings us to section 3, the incredibly thin line between philosophy and madness.
When we look back at history, we find that some of humanity's absolute greatest philosophical minds have brushed right up against this terrifying hyperreality. Take Blaise Pascal, for example. He was one of history's most brilliant mathematicians and thinkers. Well, 8 years before he died, he experienced this sudden, profound psychotic or mystical break that entirely changed his life. When he passed away, they actually found a secret note sewn into the lining of his jacket. It read, "Fire, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, not of the philosophers and scholars. Joy, joy, tears of joy." He had literally stepped outside of rational science and experienced a reality so immense, he had to stitch the memory into his clothes just to keep it close to his heart.
So how do we as humans actually figure out what's real? René Descartes gave us a pretty solid reality check. Step 1, you question the internal thought.
Step 2, compare it to facts. And Step 3, check it against the collective understanding of society. Let's say someone gives you a pink Adidas jacket. Actually, scratch that. Let's say you buy one online and you get paranoid it's a fake. How do you test it? You take it to an actual Adidas store and compare it against the collective reality. If it matches, boom, it's real. Descartes said we should do the exact same thing with our thoughts. If you think people are reading your mind, you test that against the collective reality of society. But here is the massive glitch in Descartes' system today. What happens when thousands of people online share the exact same delusion? If you believe the Earth is flat, or that secret societies are controlling the weather, you can go online right now and instantly find thousands of people who will validate that exact thought. The whole method just breaks down. When groups of people share the same delusion, collective reality gets totally fractured, and that thin line between a philosophical stance and a collective psychosis becomes incredibly dangerously blurred.
The psychotic mind is just desperate to find meaning, and honestly, this can be easily manipulated. There's this brilliant scene from the show Breaking Bad that hits the nail on the head. The character Jesse Pinkman needs to get into a house guarded by two deeply paranoid addicts who completely refuse to open the door. So what does Jesse do? He grabs a shovel and just starts digging a totally meaningless hole in the front yard. The addicts, who are trapped in this hypervigilant psychotic state, see this and their brains immediately assign deep meaning to it. When one comes out and asks why he's digging, Jesse just looks at him and says, "You know why." The psychotic mind fills in the blank with its own delusions, completely tricking itself.
All right, let's move to section 4 and see how this builds. Mysticism and psychosis. Drowning and swimming.
You know, psychologists and philosophers have noted for a long time that the experiences of the madman and the deep spiritual mystic are surprisingly similar. But there's a really crucial contrast here. Psychosis involves intense self-obsession and agonizing internal pain. To the psychotic mind, the world is against them. The secret messages are all about them. Mysticism, on the other hand, requires emptying the self entirely to receive an absolute truth. It's about finding total peace. Unfortunately, we see fake spiritual leaders and charlatans exploit these vulnerable psychotic states all the time. They basically act like Jesse Pinkman with the shovel. They read the pain of a vulnerable person, throw out some vague, meaningless statement, and just let that desperate, suffering mind do the rest of the work, totally tricking the person into believing they've found divine insight.
The philosopher Emile Cioran shared this honestly chilling visual metaphor from a psychiatric patient that captures the pure agony of psychosis perfectly. The patient said, "I am like a broken doll whose eyes have fallen inward." Wow, think about how terrifying that is. The psychotic mind is entirely trapped. It can't see the beauty of the outside world anymore. It's completely consumed by staring at its own broken internal parts, just drowning in self-hatred and profound isolation.
And that brings us to the absolute climax of this explainer. The great mythologist Joseph Campbell famously said, "The psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight." It is the exact same ocean, the deep, overwhelming waters of the unconscious mind. The mystic enters these waters willingly, floating, looking up at the sky in pure bliss. But the psychotic? They are thrown into these exact same waters violently, thrashing, terrified, and drowning in those exact same depths.
Finally, we reach section 5, a journey to self-discovery and recovery. Because despite all the terror we've just talked about, there is actually a deeply hopeful, redemptive view of mental breakdowns here, heavily championed by the legendary psychologist Carl Jung. Jung didn't see psychosis merely as some biological misfire. His vision was that psychosis is a profound collision. It's the conscious mind violently crashing into the hidden, terrifying depths of the unconscious. It literally forces an individual to confront their deepest fears, their buried traumas, and those massive, unanswerable questions of existence that most of us just comfortably ignore every single day. So, the crucial point is, when this epic collision happens, you basically have two distinct paths. The first path is tragic. The individual lacks support and they just drown alone in isolation, fear, and permanent delusion. But the second path? That's one of rebirth. If a person is surrounded by profound love, immense support, and a safe environment, they can actually use this terrifying journey to rebuild their entire sense of self. They can emerge from those depths uniquely wise, deeply self-aware, and completely healed, holding this profound understanding of the human condition that most of us will honestly never achieve.
So, we've covered the medical facts, the philosophical glitches, and the absolute deep oceans of the human mind. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. If the boundary of collective reality suddenly shattered for you today, and you were thrown violently into the depths of your own unconscious,
Would you drown in the deep waters, or would you learn to swim? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the world around you.